Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of The Drop. Greg Wyshynski, Arda, Öcal here with you every Tuesday and Friday, wherever you get your audio podcasts as well. The NHL on ESPN YouTube. Wish, I'm a little tired today. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I've been around. It's been a great weekend, a really fun weekend. Still catching up. Got my coffee in hand, ready to go. I got a new shirt. Do you see this? ESPN Analytics.
Yeah,
one of my favorite departments.
It's amazing.
It's wonderful.
That's fantastic. So your travels brought you to the Sloan Conference at MIT. That's a conference I've done as well. And you hosted a...
How many panels have you done there?
I hosted one panel, and then the rest of the time I went as a conference goer. It's so cool because it's the biggest brains you could find in all of sports. There's a certain Shark Tank element to it as well, where these companies come and they bring their stuff and they're trying to pitch it to people. It's really one of my favorite places. The newborn kind of mucked up plans to go there, but you hosted a panel. What was it? PK, Megan Chayka, Tyler Dello of the Devils, and who else?
Your buddy Tyler Dello. Really cool to meet him in person for the first time. You guys go way back. Like you said, PK was on the panel. He's awesome as always. Megan Chayka, speaking of super brilliant people, and also Brett Peterson, who's the AGM of the assistant general manager of the Florida Panthers. Awesome, great dude. But to your point, I walked into the green room and I'm like, the first thought I just saw these brilliant CMOs, and then Robert Kraft is in a corner talking with people, and I'm like, I do not belong in this room. That was my first thought. Yeah. And then a couple of ESPN executives walk in, and I'm like, I definitely don't belong in this room. But everyone is vibing and getting together. But it was great. We did a hockey analytics panel. It was really cool. I was shocked that it wasn't a full room, but I was shocked at how many people showed up at 8:30 in the morning. We were the first panel of the day. So that was cool. But yeah, to your point, it's a lot of the biggest brains in sports at this conference, which is cool.
And then your travels took you to scenic Buffalo, New York, where you were the, what do you call it? Between the benches reporter, the roving reporter. I don't know what the hell we call it, but you were the guy with the mic jumping in and giving the facts and doing the coaches interviews during the Sabres game this weekend.
Yeah, that was first time for ESPN for me. A lot of fun. Thanks for the love, everybody. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, between the benches, you forget watching on TV how fast our game really is, right? That's the first thing that struck me. I actually had to take a minute or two to acclimatize to oh man, this is awesome. I had to snap out of that really fast because I was in fan mode for a good 30 seconds. I was like, oh my God, look how fast Tage Thompson is moving. I was really, okay, hey, let's get back to business here. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I was with Mike Monaco and Ryan Callahan, who are two of our very best at ESPN. They're absolutely terrific human beings too. But
all right, no names.
Okay.
What was the best piece of trash talk you heard while you were doing that gig?
There was one player that was really, really upset with himself.
With
on
himself.
The bench. Yeah, he slammed the door and he threw his glove down and he was just stewing on the bench. And then he snapped out of it after a good 30 seconds, but just really mad.
I think this is really keeping with the theme of the drop, which is I ask you for the best trash talk and you give us the best piece of self-loathing. I think that's definitely keeping.
There was they even asked me during the game, they were not trash talking. There was one fight in the game. That was it. There was no trash talking at all. I think one Vegas player was talking to the referee between periods to confirm a rule. That was about as much trash talk as we saw in that game.
There you go.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I have one more coming up later this month. Really excited about it. But enough about me, Wish. Let's talk about the weekend in general because a lot happened in the NHL. Let's go winners and losers. I'm loving this, by the way. Winners and losers is a lot of fun for me, especially because I like hearing what you liked and what you didn't like from the weekend as a whole. So start us off. What's one winner from the weekend?
Elias Pettersson, man, 8-year contract extension, $92.8 million, ranking within the top 4, I think, in salary and top 3 in cap hit. I might have that reversed, but it's around that net neighborhood. It's a great deal for Vancouver to get this thing done, to establish and cement one of the pillars of your franchise. Obviously, so much consternation. We'll get to that in a second as far as what his future might be. Talk that the Canucks and the Carolina Hurricanes were engaged in trade conversations, Jim Rutherford's old team, Whether or not that leverage things to get the ball rolling, who knows? But the deal is done, and they secure really one of the elite players in this league for the next 8 years. What
did you make of the back and forth, like just the Elias Pettersson side of things, where he's like, I don't know, we'll see what happens, and then the Vancouver side of things is like, maybe we'll explore. Like, there was a lot of like interesting comments from both sides before we got to this deal. What did you make of the preamble to get to this point?
Well, that's why my loser to go along with this winter, Arda, is the Vancouver media. They've been deprived of what could have been several more months of this back and forth, of this worrying, of this concern, of the fans losing their minds because they're wondering if Pettersson wants to even be in Vancouver. I mean, these were the emotions that we had for the last 3 weeks, and they were compounded by the fact that the Canucks hadn't been playing all that well. Trade rumors, speculation about his future, all of that. It would have at least gone into the summer when he was an RFA. It could have gone beyond that without a contract extension. What did I make of it? I made of it that it was a lot of noise that honestly I thought was taking away from what was a really great season for Vancouver. I predicted before the season that the Pettersson contract talk would overshadow the season in some ways, and I think it had been in the last month. So to get this done, to take it off the table, to refocus everything on hockey, whether it's within the room, within Pettersson's mind, or in the Vancouver media, I think was pretty essential.
Let me give you my winner and loser. It's the same thing. It is Matt Rempe fighting. So
Okay.
winner because everyone wanted to see the Saturday night fight, center ice in Toronto, Ryan Reaves versus Matt Rempe. We finally got it. I love that Matt Rempe sort of looked at the bench before he dropped the gloves. So like he shooed away Ryan Reaves, the earlier advances or the requests in the game. They finally come together. It was a fun fight. Listen, fans enjoy it. They're more than willing to engage. So cool. But the loser now is I think we've reached the point of diminishing returns. I think now is the point where I don't think I want to see Matt Rempe fight every single player in the NHL. I think that this particular one was interesting. The timing was good. Ryan Reaves is one of the heavyweights, one of the best, big men fighters in the NHL. So we got that fight. It was entertaining. They got out of it unscathed. So good on them. But now we got to see the guy play, right? Yeah. Like I think that the entertainment value of the Matt Rempe fights, we've reached a point where they need them to be more few and far between for them to be entertaining as a fan.
Yeah, my feature on Rempe dropped after our last episode. It dropped on Saturday. You can still catch it on ESPN.com. And I think there's a desire for Rempe to move beyond the I'm the guy who plays 7 minutes and fights thing that has characterized his sensational beginning of his rookie season. I think he wants to be more than that. I think he wants to be a guy who brings energy, that can, stand in front of the net and have the puck hit him like he had in his first NHL goal. I also found it really interesting in this fight with Reaves, Arda. It was a different kind of fight for Rempe. Rempe had really energized the Rangers fan base by having these 1970s throwback fights where it is just haymaker, 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 no defense. It's like watching fire wagon hockey back in the 1980s. But there was some concern about that, and one of the guys who was concerned was John Scott, once and former and future the drop guest, who I have some history with the All-Star game. But John Scott and I talked, and he said that he reached out to Rempe over social media to kind of say, "Hey, look, man, unsolicited advice. You've got reach. You're big and tall. You've got to use it. If you don't use it, it ends up being a liability. You got to play a little bit more defense. If you get concussed a bunch of times, you're not going to last in this league." And the way that he fought Reaves, to me, was taking that advice. He used his reach. He kept Reaves at bay. He was using those little rabbit punches while holding his jersey, and it looked like a different kind of fight. So I think it just goes to show that Rempe wants to learn. He's not looking to just be a flash in the pan. He's taking the advice from people that have come before him. And like you said, hopefully we are past the novelty of him dropping the gloves every other game, and he can kind of become what the Rangers hope he becomes, which is a really valuable bottom six forward for what they hope is going to be a long playoff run, provided he's not market corrected by somebody they pick up at the trade deadline, of course.
Right, and that could very well happen. One more winner and loser from you?
Yeah, Western wildcard race, man, is sick at this point. I know the numbers aren't necessarily there for some of the teams chasing the wild card. As we do the podcast, the Golden Knights are not necessarily out of the woods yet in the 3 spot in the Pacific. Then you had the Kings and the Predators both in the wild card spots. The Flames, Blues, Wild, Kraken chasing them still within striking distance. Much respect to the Predators for putting the pedal down. We talked about the cancellation of the field trip to the Sphere to see U2. Well, they've continued to stay extraordinarily hot, but the West being as wild as it is, not only makes the last weeks of the season very interesting, but obviously has a pretty big impact on the trade deadline. All right, loser, Lindy Ruff, fired by the New Jersey Devils, replaced by interim coach Travis Green. You may remember him from 5 seasons in Vancouver. My thought right now, and the thought of a lot of Devils fans, is about Andrew Brunette, the head coach of the Nashville Predators, who was the associate coach under Ruff last season, a season in which the Devils broke out, were amazing defensively, great defensively, were a playoff team that won around. Brunette leaves for Nashville. Things fall apart. Did they back the wrong horse? Should they have fired Lindy after the playoffs last year and not let Andrew Brunette get away? I don't know. The Devils said it's an extremely difficult conversation to have with Lindy based on his relationship with GM Tom Fitzgerald. He was the right coach to develop our young players on the ice, and above all else, a tremendous person, very good person. And as they said, the right guy to develop a young team, but maybe not the guy to shepherd them to the next tier. The Devils have a 15.8% chance of making the playoffs. Okay, so the question is, with 21 games left, is this too little too late? Is there not enough runway for them to turn it around? They are the type of team that can get streaky, but the real question is whether or not they have what it takes to actually turn it around. They have systemic defensive problems. They have sub-replacement goaltending. Do they fix that at the deadline? I think Eric Wallace said it best the other day. It's not for a lack of effort that the Devils are losing. It's a lack of execution. Does Travis Green change that? As far as the firing of Lindy Ruff, look, obviously if the Devils missed the playoffs, he was gone this summer. This is just making a change earlier, hoping to jolt the team that you knew you were going to make in the offseason anyway. The loss to the Ducks over the weekend, inexcusable. And then the loss to the Kings was them going through the motions and playing like a team that wanted to get their coach fired. He is fired. I just question whether it is too little too late for the Devils.
So there will be tears in your beer for Greg Wyshynski and the Devils. But as it pertains to the Penguins, they are very interesting, especially because of the pieces that they have on the roster that may end up on new teams. And there's one guy that we should absolutely talk to about the Pittsburgh Penguins. NHL trade deadline is just days away. Who better to bring on the drop than Rob Rossi, who's a senior writer for The Athletic, also Evgeny Malkin autobiographer. Rob joining us from Pittsburgh right now. Rob, thanks for making time for us in this busy season. I know that you got to take a second to stop working the phone so that you can join us here and talk about all things trade deadline. And why don't we start with the Penguins, because they're a fascinating team, man. Where's Jake Guentzel going, Rob?
Boy, that's a great question. It's my understanding that the Penguins are trying to get this down to 2 teams so they can really leverage what deal they want. I have heard, not from people in the Penguins, but other people that I've talked to, that Vegas is very, right now on Monday, the deadline multiple days away. I think he's probably going to the Western Conference, but this is a tough one for Kyle Dubas because, and I don't mean from you got to get Sidney Crosby and this to buy in. He has to maximize this deal. All the other parts are, maybe he can eat salary or take something back that is less of an asset. But the rebuild that begins this summer starts by maximizing the return you get for Guentzel. And I don't know that first round picks interest Kyle as much as higher end prospects from any organization that he's going to deal with.
Right. Well, I guess the first two questions for you, Rossi. The first is that is finality, what you just gave us. I know there's like a thought out there of will they maybe keep the band together? He's Sid's best line mate he's ever had. He's gone in your estimation.
Yeah, I mean, I what is it? Never say never, right?
Yeah.
It's my understanding that when Jake submitted his list, it included teams that he and his team envisioned Stanley Cup championship caliber teams, and not all, but on many ones to which he would be comfortable re-signing. And I think that's important because there haven't really been extension talks with the Penguins. I mean, that's irked Guentzel a little bit. So if there haven't been extension talks on the Monday before the trade deadline, I don't know how you don't trade him. I do know that Dubas going into last week when they went out west was going to give them that trip to try to force his hand a little bit, but they didn't. And, you know, I think especially the weekend makes it a lot easier for Kyle Dubas to not push the explode button, but you know, start doing some things.
Now, the other question I had for you is like, I've been fascinated by Dubas's task here. You know, when Ron Hextall was hired as the GM of the Penguins, it was to win with this group. I mean, that was his task. When Dubas was hired, the tone and tenor of the press conference was much different. It was much more like, you are going to maximize our window to win with these veteran players, but also be the guy to think about a post-Crosby world for the Penguins, that kind of thing. So is the Guentzel trade, in your opinion, going to veer more towards we're going to still try to maximize the window? Or is the Guentzel trade, do you think, the first real step towards whatever the next phase of the Penguins is going to be?
I think it's the latter.
Okay.
And I wrote something in The Athletic that's on the site now about Kyle Dubas and the situation at hand, and I referred to it as a failed hero's journey. and I mean, really, to me, he's Frodo in this situation. The journey is the reward for Kyle. He has a 7-year deal. He's being paid very well. He has full commitment from ownership, but ownership is also the ones that wanted to keep Letang and Malkin, because ownership's interest is in also maximizing Gate. Those players are extraordinarily popular in Pittsburgh, and also and here's the difference between Jake and those guys when it comes to Sidney Crosby. And let's face it, everything in Pittsburgh still revolves around Sidney Crosby.
Right.
Jake is probably his greatest line mate. Jake is a guy he very much cares about. Malkin and Letang are two of his best friends. And that's not to say he and Jake aren't close, but they've already given Sid what he wanted, the chance to have the big three end their careers in Pittsburgh. Right. So, but I think for Kyle, part of this is, look, it's kind of an impossible task, right? So I don't know if what they're asking of him can be done, because we've never seen it done in the NHL cap era, which kind of puts him in a position of like, what are you in this for? Well, you want to win, but you're trying to do two things at once, and that doesn't really work. So I mean, he's kind of Frodo, right? Like,
yeah,
you know, the ring itself is probably not the objective.
Right.
The Sid is fascinating to me. Like, you can see him riding off into the sunset with the Penguins, you know, him and Malkin and Letang, the whole record, you know, the trio together, right? And then you can also, you know, if he were to decide, hey, I want to chase one more cup, you can understand that too, even though he has 3, right? Like, I guess what I'm wondering is, you sort of answered this already in a way, but what is his future? Like, does an actual possibility exist that he could go and chase a cup before the end of his career? Like, have you ever gotten any sort of inclination that might be a possibility with him?
I would put it somewhere between minus 100% and minus infinity%. I talked to him about this a few weeks ago. As Greg knows, Sid and I we're good. We're in a good place now. But it hasn't always been that way. But on this particular subject, he has been consistent. I have never known Sidney Crosby to have a good poker face. It's just not something he's gifted with. He is earnest to a fault, even to the point where believing that this roster as it is right now can still contend. He believes that because that's the way he's wired. I think what people around the league have to wrap their heads around is Sidney Crosby sees his legacy as more tied to the Pittsburgh Penguins than the National Hockey League. He's won 3 Stanley Cup championships. The 2014 to 2018 run where that followed his missing a bunch of time because of the concussions and the broken jaw. The peak Sid run was as good as we've seen from anybody not named Gretzky, Lemieux, or Orr.
Yeah.
And I don't think he views chasing a cup as something that is really in his DNA. Now, chasing a cup again in Pittsburgh, that is. Could I see him sticking around through maybe a little bit of pain and maybe being the 40-year-old guy on a team that's coming up again and maybe he shows them the way? Yes. But this idea that I'll go join Nate MacKinnon, Sid's a creature of habit. He doesn't want to leave what he has created here in Pittsburgh, which is his own habitation, basically.
I will say this. If he were to join Nathan MacKinnon and they were to win the cup together, at least the Stanley Cup party in Nova Scotia would be a lot easier.
True. I think it wouldn't be as fun, though, because
You don't think so?
No, to me, I think the fun of those parties is also when you can show up as a visitor, not a member. Because I've heard of people that went to Sid parties and they're just like, yeah, I was completely gone by 10 minutes. Whereas if when you win the Stanley Cup, by the time you get to all those parties, if you're invited, you're exhausted. You're like, I've been drinking for weeks.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, in fairness, Sid's first cup, I think he was still living in Mario's wine cellar. So yes, I'm sure that was a banger.
The cup ended up again in Mario's pool and broken. I mean, it's
Rossi, let me ask you this though. You just mentioned Sid and the Penguins. I mean, is there a reality in the multiverse where Sid takes the altruistic path and says, to do right by this organization, to do right by Mario, that would be me moving on and them getting a treasure trove for me? Is there at all that in his brain, you think?
I think there's a part of the multiverse where that existed, but it's also the multiverse where Mario's still the owner of the team.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
I feel like my thought on this is Sid is going to sign either a contract of 5 to 6 years that just commits him to his early 40s and we end this discussion, or he's going to do 2-year deals. A 2-year deal, a 2-year extension this summer would take him through the Olympics. I think that's something he's really looking at. Knowing Sid, he wants to win. I think he knows what they're doing now on some level isn't. I think he understands that they have to get somewhat younger, even if it's not elite talent, because guys in their 30s just need a lot more guys in their 20s. To me, if you're thinking about legacy, what's the greater legacy than that? Nobody's done that, And if it just so happens that none of the next waves, the next Sids, and I don't know if that's fair to Connor McDavid, because to me he's a unicorn in his own right. But if none of those guys win between now and when Sid's in his 40s and the Penguins might be decent again, I think he's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to run up the score.
I love it.
Rob, last one from me is just even outside of Pittsburgh, what teams fascinate you at the trade deadline?
Well, Edmonton. I mean, because I just isn't this McDavid's best chance? I mean, the cap's going to go up. Who knows what the contract for Draisaitl will look like? They look really good. It looks like the league is open. To me, Edmonton. I don't know what the Rangers can do, but I think the Rangers probably need to do something to be able to compete with Florida in a 7-game series. I don't know what that is. I think Lars Eller on the Rangers would be a really good fit. He could play that style defensively. So I think those two. And obviously, look, I mean, maybe we're all in the same boat here. Maybe it's just me. I love seeing what the Toronto Maple Leafs will do that will lead to anguish by their fan base. Because we know they're not going to win. We know they're going to think they should win. And we know that every move they make will be celebrated. This is the reason the cup is finally coming to Toronto, which it hasn't done since the league expanded. I'm just saying. But also, then they will destroy those moves because it didn't work out. So I'm always fascinated by Toronto.
Well,
and
now you're
probably
just
for
trying to
Pittsburgh's
curry.
reasons.
You're just trying to curry favor with Kyle Dubas now in this interview. I don't appreciate that,
Oh
Rob.
no. I was in favor of the Toronto thing. And I have some friends that work in the organization, so I'd like to see them win, but it's for them. But yeah, it's, I mean, but to me, Edmonton, like I don't know. I mean, where do you guys stand on that?
I no, I completely agree. I agree on the West. I mean, like Vancouver has already shown that there are bumps in the road for them. Colorado, same deal. Dallas and Vegas are probably the two stoutest teams they have to get through, right?
Yeah.
And that's what makes our previous conversation about Mr. Guentzel so interesting because
Well,
they,
and right, because if it does
yeah,
come down to Guentzel being Vegas or Edmonton, there's a chance we're going to see that in the first round.
yeah,
Probably a high probability. So if you're Kyle Dubas, getting back to all this, right? Aren't those the two teams you want to leverage against each other?
yeah.
Like,
And the
what
thing
have
that
you
we
against this difference
the,
maker?
the thing that makes
100%.
the thing that makes Gensel so special at the deadline is, I mean, rare is the player who's a point per game guy in the playoffs. Like Gensel always steps up in the playoffs. Like it's
For
sick.
those
So,
that don't know Jake Guentzel well enough, from the day he stepped into this league, he showed an absolute ignorance to the pressures of playoff hockey that has benefited him. And he is he's a diminutive guy, but he'll be able to play with anybody because he thinks the game on a level that is near Sidney Crosby. And he's a tough guy, dude. I mean,
yeah.
he will battle. Like you'll watch Jake Guentzel in a game and be like I don't know how he's standing. And he's got a goal and an assist because he's in the front of the net. And I mean, I what he could do for Edmonton, even what I saw last night, is I think he could show Edmonton how to win a Stanley Cup.
There you go. Rings in the room, baby. Rob Rossi, you think the game like no one else as well. And thanks for joining us on the drop.
Well, it helps to not think. So
Thanks again to Rob Rossi for joining us here on The Drop. All right, we are not only in trade deadline season, Wish, we are also in awards season, and you, better than anyone in the hockey space, watch this, cover this, prognosticate this. What do you have for us as it pertains to the NHL Awards?
Yeah, the NHL Awards Watch, we run it every month. We ask over 24 voters, Professional Hockey Writers Association voters, for their ballots. We collect them and we see where the winds are really blowing for some of these awards. Let's get right to it. The Hart Trophy. My God, Arda. Oh my God. So many people up for the Hart Trophy. One of the tightest races you've ever seen, but also one of the wildest races we've ever seen because you have literally 5 guys, maybe even 6, that have a claim to the throne. As we enter the discussion about this award, I think Kucherov, MacKinnon, Matthews, McDavid, Hellebuck, Pasternak, they all have their supporters. But according to the voters, the ones who actually will cast ballots for MVP in the National Hockey League, Nikita Kucherov is the leader for the Hart Trophy. Now, he might not be the leader in the minds of a lot of people who think it's MacKinnon's time. He might not be the leader in the minds of the sports books that have Austin Matthews currently as the betting favorite to win the Hart Trophy. But by one single first place vote, okay, of all the first place votes we collected, he had 44% of them. He had one more vote than Nathan MacKinnon to lead this pack. So right now, Arda, by the slimmest of margins, Nikita Kucherov is your MVP.
2 things on this. Number one, I liked your point about the narrative with Nathan MacKinnon on our previous podcast. You were like, he's due, he deserves one. This might be the year, just from a storyline perspective, that he receives it. I also love, though, that Nikita Kucherov is getting love in this vote because he's been the one that's kind of lurking in the shadows in this whole Hart Trophy race because of how strong the other narratives are. And by the way, Connor McDavid is not here. He had the worst possible start, and now he could possibly win the Art Ross. So that's another storyline. So yeah. I find this very interesting, especially with Nikita Kucherov getting his flowers here at 44%. That's interesting to see.
Couple quick things. Only 4 players received first place votes, and it was Kucherov, MacKinnon, Matthews, and Connor Hellebuck. So McDavid did not receive a first place vote, nor did David Pasternak. I agree. Kucherov's interesting because he has his own narrative. Like the idea that Vasilevsky was out for almost 2 months, came back, wasn't himself. Kucherov carries them through that. The fact that the Lightning are a wild card team. You could point to the Leafs, you could point to the Avalanche and say these teams are probably playoff teams, even if MacKinnon and Matthews don't pop off. Not the same for the Lightning. If it is not for Kucherov, who, by the way, is right now a country mile ahead of Braden Point as far as the scoring amongst his teammates, they are not a playoff team. So the thing about Matthews, though, that's interesting, and I mentioned he's the betting favorite, and there's a reason for that, which is a few voters that we polled who give their feedback on these ballots said if he breaks 70, which he's on pace to do, it's going to be hard to deny him the MVP. That hasn't been done since Solani and McGillney back in 92, 93. The idea that if he breaks 70 and becomes the first player to do so in decades, there are some people that I think will reconsider their votes for either MacKinnon or Kucherov and potentially give it to Matthews. So something to keep in mind.
If you happen to miss it, we ranked these scenarios, these like milestone scenarios on our last show in terms of the Hart Trophy scenario. What about the Norris?
Norris, Quinn Hughes has been leading this award for the last few months. He continues to. He has 78% of all the first place votes. In fact, the only other player to get a first place vote was Cale Makar, and he is obviously significantly behind Quinn Hughes for this award right now. The other finalist, I think, could be Noah Dobson of the New York Islanders. He's still very high in the points totals for the season and is getting a lot of attention for his overall play. But it's been a two-horse race here for the entirety of the season, and right now Quinn Hughes is nosing towards the finish line, Arda. He has a pretty commanding lead.
What about the Calder?
All right, this is as crazy as the Hart. When Connor Bedard went out with that broken jaw in January, it gave Brock Faber a chance to catch up in the Calder race and also open the eyes of a lot of voters. And the eyes remain open. Brock Faber leading for the Calder Trophy right now in the first place votes. Both he and Bedard, the only rookies to receive first place votes, and Faber got 52% of them, Bedard 48%. Close race, but Faber has the lead right now. And if you had to say a third player in this mix, Arda, I would say Marco Rossi of the Minnesota Wild is probably the one who got the most mention down the ballot. But I would keep an eye on Peter Kachukov of the Carolina Hurricanes as a rookie goalie who is really making waves late in the season, could probably sneak in there.
Good for the Wild. They got 2 of the 3 here on this particular list. 2 words, Wysh, recency bias. I'm sorry, but if Connor Bedard performs anywhere near what he did before his injury for the rest of the season, to me, it's a lock.
Yeah,
it just is. And I'm not taking anything away from Brock Faber or even Marco Rossi. They've been great, but Connor Bedard is just that good. So to me, this screams he's been out, and we want to throw Brock Faber his flowers because he's been terrific in Bedard's absence in gaining that steam. But to me, it's Bedard's to lose.
I think, Faber's got the time on ice thing. He's playing an enormous amount of minutes for the Wild. He's playing like he's been a veteran defenseman in this league for 10 years. The other thing about Bedard, too, is he's no longer a point per game player. Like the overwhelming argument of his offensive dominance, he's kind of lost that a little bit in the last few weeks. So I don't know. Tight race. We'll see where it goes. Real quick, Vezina, the writers do not vote for it. The GMs do. Connor Hellebuck has a commanding lead there over Thatcher Demko and Jacob Markstrom, who also received the first place vote. The Selke, again, commanding lead for Alexander Barkov. It's an award that gets a lot of different people up for the award. The other 2 finalists based on first place votes, Sam Reinhart, his teammate, which would be a real interesting one considering he's been an offensive star for them.
Hey, the man.
But his D is great. And then also Jordan Stahl, who is the point person for one of the best checking lines in the league. Finally, Arda, the Jack Adams Coach of the Year. This is a real interesting one because Rick Tocchet continues to lead. He's got 48% of all the first place votes. Then comes the guy who I think could steal the award if the Flyers make the playoffs. That's John Tortorella with 30%. And then finally, Paul Maurice, who is behind the bench for what could be a President Trophy winning team in the Florida Panthers with 9% of the votes. The NHL broadcasters are the ones who vote for that one, not the writers. What do you think about Tocchet leading Torts?
Yeah, I think it's because the Canucks are so good. Like the Flyers have the benefit of they shouldn't be or many people thought they shouldn't be a playoff team, but they are, and they're crediting it to the Torts effect. Right. But Rick Tocchet came into a team that many people didn't expect to be this good or leading the NHL or combating that spot anyway. And he's done what he's done with Vancouver as well. So if you were to compare the two based purely on output and effectiveness, you're going to give it to Tocchet. But if I will say this, if Torts does win the award, I wouldn't be surprised, especially if they do make the playoffs. I would not be surprised at all. My last question before we go here, and obviously this is a monthly thing that Wysh does, ESPN.com, for all of his articles, but this as well. If whoever presents the award, the Selke Award at the NHL Awards broadcast, do you believe that they will also call it the Patrice Bergeron special? Like, no, should we just plant the seed right now?
I don't think they will, because I think it'll probably be Bergeron that gives it out.
It's just my prediction for the award. The me award.
Unless he's become an absolute egomaniac in retirement, I can't imagine him handing it to Alexander Barkov and being like, "Here's your Bergeron award."
Yeah. The winner of my award is Well, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, NHL Awards Watch, always a fun time. Nice little respite in the madness of the trade deadline. But obviously, Arda trade deadline top of mind. What do we got coming up this Friday?
So this Friday, we're actually going to do a special post-trade deadline edition of The Drop. So once the trade deadline is over, and by the way, we do have trade deadline coverage on ESPN. It'll be on ESPN2 and ESPN Plus. Yes, I should have waited for the trumpets. Thank you, Wysh. That is going to be on E2 and E Plus. It is a 2-hour special right at the end of the trade deadline at 3 p.m. Eastern, and then we can break it all down for another hour. But then following that, we will have a drop special where we talk about the winners and losers of the trade deadline day and what faces are in new places and what teams suddenly become cup contenders or rebuilds and whatever happens. And we will be there to cover it all.
You're on notice, Kyle Dubas. Arda and I are watching like hawks at the trade deadline.
Who will he smash a steel chair to the back of which GM? We will find out on Friday. Thanks for watching The Drop. Remember, special edition on Friday, but usually every Tuesday and Friday, wherever you get your audio podcasts and the NHL and ESPN YouTube. See you on trade deadline day.
Take care.